We're now joined by Dr. Anil Gupta, Professor of Strategy at the University of Maryland and INSEAD. Thank you very much.
Delighted to be here.
You're going to help us understand these numbers. First of all, we talk about the slowing of the economy. These PMI numbers, a number above 50, still means it's growing. So it's a little inaccurate to say it's actually slowing. It's slower growth. Am I right?
Precisely. Yeah, exactly. It's a deceleration in growth, but it's growth.
All right. If I'm watching the news and we hear about this rebound around the world, China's growing, Europe's growing, but the data doesn't seem to agree with what we want to believe. What's happening in the world, and in particular, what's going on in China here?
Yeah, I think if we look at, of course, the PMI numbers are about manufacturing, and clearly manufacturing is a huge chunk of China's economy. So if you look at manufacturing, really, in fact, it's driven by three pieces. The biggest piece is manufacturing that's driven by infrastructure-related manufacturing.
Bridges, buildings.
Steel, cement, all the things you can, glass, things that go into buildings, into highways, bridges, tunnels, and the like. So that's number one. And I think that's really which is under pressure. The second, of course, is domestic consumption. And I think domestic consumption is doing fine and will continue to do fine. And the third is exports. And once again, exports are under pressure. So I think of the three big components of manufacturing, two are under serious pressure.
So, but wait a minute. That's a slowdown. I mean, if exports are having a tough time, consumption's in question, and infrastructure, all these things, if they're really slowing, as the data indicates, at least in the last couple of months,
correct,
that means either China is slowing down or the world is slowing down.
I think both. The world is slowing down, which of course means that exports are slowing down. But at the same time, within China, we have massive overcapacity, particularly in the heavy industry. Once again, the steel and cement and glass and chemicals that go into construction, things like that. And so when you have, the previous track record of 14% net of inflation annual growth in fixed asset investment, that is not sustainable.
To put this into perspective, over the last 5-6 years in China, we've seen massive investment in building bridges, highways, airports, ports, you name it, it's been built. Now, as we have new leadership in China, and is there going to be a new way of growth? It's going to be a different kind of growth. And perhaps it's not going to be an infrastructure, it's going to be something else. And what is that going to be?
That's going to be mainly domestic consumption, because and it's going to be much more consumer goods rather than capital goods, rather than goods that go in, exactly, once again, things that are connected to infrastructure. Clearly, infrastructure and construction will continue to grow. But it cannot continue to grow at the pace at which it has.
You mentioned something earlier that a lot of people are talking about, is this overcapacity. And what we mean by that, if you've got 10 factories and only 5 of them are actually being utilized,
or
there's five that's being basically not used at all.
Correct.
How does a country like China, who has so many of these factories, how do they address that problem? Is it to put them to work, or is it to shut down the ones that aren't being used?
I think firstly, the kind of overcapacity that exists in China in terms of the magnitude, this is not something that can be solved very quickly. What will happen, of course, is that as the government already has plans, for example, in the steel sector, is to shut down the smaller factories, the more polluting factories, and so on. So there's going to be capacity reduction, which also actually will go towards a greener China, more efficient China. So that would be one part of it. Second, clearly, China's economy will continue to grow. Now, it may not grow at 8% or 10%, but it may grow at 7%, 7.5%, and that growth will eat up, if you will, some of the excess capacity.
We always joke that China needs to have 7%, 7.5% just to kind of stay even. What's your sense, though, in the mood? I mean, what do you worry about in terms of China's economy? What's the number one thing you think about?
I think for example, if China's economy could continue to grow at 7.5%, I think that would be very good. My worry is that while a 7.5% would be very good for China, would be very good for the rest of the world, that actually would be not an easy job, because in fact, there is a serious risk, in my view, a risk, not a certainty, that China's economy may actually grow around 6 if you look at the next 5 years.
Which would be too slow.
Which would be too slow. But once again, if you look at what has, just take Q1 of 2013. So it grew at 7.7%. Now the credit in the economy was 58% higher year on year compared to Q1 of 2012.
Fascinating.
And so when the credit goes up 58%, but the GDP growth in Q1 2012 was 8 point something, and now it is 7.7. So that tells us the magnitude of the challenge that China faces.
All right, Dr. Anil Gupta from the University of Maryland. Not too fast, not too slow. Thank you very much for coming on the show.